The Under 19 inaugural Women's World Cup begins this Saturday, January 14th. How excited are you to watch and follow, not just as a journalist, but a former practitioner of the sport yourself, to see a historic chapter in the women's game being written?
I'm very, very excited about the inaugural edition of the Under 19 World Cup. As a kid growing up, you always want to play in tournaments like these. And I remember when I played Under 19 cricket almost a decade back, there were talks about having a bilateral series against New Zealand or West Indies, which unfortunately never materialized. But for the young girls who are taking up sport to have a World Cup, I think it is something really, really exciting and glad that it is materialized and we are about to witness history in a week's time.
Certainly, and given there hasn't been a lot of visibility around the under 19 or age group women's teams, the men's tournament has been in place for close to, nearly 1.5 decades now.
Yeah.
So for the women's game to get something as brand new a property as an under 19 women's World Cup shows that the ICC's thrust has been, to promote the women's game, and they are very much on track to put their money where their mouth is. Personally, I think it gives an opportunity for the future, to be
Yeah.
visible to the cricketing world, to fans, followers of the sport, journalists. Yes, we like taking notes, so we do like looking for those odd streams wherever it is, wherever they're available, no matter how poor or great the quality. That's no insinuation at anyone, but we are just very grateful to be able to see some of these cricketers in the lead up to one of the most important tournaments in the history of the game, whether it be the men's game or the women's game. And talking about how things have been shaping up, one of the front runners, we are told, or we understand, going by the matches,
Yeah.
the tournaments they have played so far, happen to be India. Their senior team have, punched above their weight in major tournaments, just quite contrary to how they keep performing in bilaterals. They keep getting hammered, to put
Yeah.
it mildly. But looking at how the India under 19s have performed in the 3 months leading up to the World Cup, would you agree that they look like, one of the most formidable teams out there who could put the other opposition teams very much in pressure?
Definitely. I think India, with the preparations they've had in the lead up to the tournament. I remember they had like a Challenger Trophy, they had a camp, and all of that has actually worked in their favor, and they are now slowly as one of the front runners along with Australia. In any world tournament, you cannot count Australia out. So I think for the tournament starting next Saturday, Australia and India are the two front runners. Also, I think very important that because for women's cricket to have something like an under 19 tournament and an under 19 World Cup, because we do not have a lot of age group cricket. For the boys, you have the under 16, under 14 levels, and for the women's team, I remember when I first made my debut almost a decade back, I was 12, 13, and then you suddenly thrown into the under 19 team. As much as you have the skill sets, as much as you belong here, but you somewhere lack in the basic strength aspect of what a somebody of say 16, 17-year old would. And then you suddenly start doubting yourself, which I think the under 19 World Cup will, and the BCC has done really well in introducing an under 15 tournament this season. But earlier we actually never had that, so there was a big gap that we had to compete with the people. We had to compete with girls who are a lot older than you and match their skill levels. So that was something that was very important for the BCCI to do, and I think the under 15 level and the under 19 level, they're always going to be a stepping stone for people, for the national side.
And speaking of what the BCCI has done well in the lead up to the World Cup is the number of bilaterals they arranged for the India under 19s, because as you rightly mentioned, there's not a lot of age group cricket that was happening. And remember, the pandemic enforced hiatus that stalled Indian cricket wasn't a long time ago. It was just a year and a half ago. So that did have its impact on the cricketing ecosystem overall. So for the BCCI to kick things off, start of proceedings with a quadrangular series in Vizag, which featured an India A under 19 team, an India B under 19 team, as well as the West Indies under 19s and Sri Lanka under 19s. India A under 19s were the eventual winners. And remember that it was under Nushin Al Khadir, who is the current under 19 head coach of the national team that is already in South Africa and is gearing up to kick off their tournament later this week, who was the head coach of the India under 19s, the A team as well. So there was some continuity that we have. There has been some continuity we've seen in this regard as well, because unlike the senior team where there's a lot of chopping and changing that keeps happening in the support stuff, it was very important for the BCCI to ensure not just giving them adequate game time, the players, but also giving them a support staff, at least one, the most prominent face, the most prominent figure they were to work with. For the men's team, it was Rahul Dravid, memorably, and then Rishikesh Kanetkar in the 2022 edition of the Under 19 Men's World Cup. And here is Noshin Al Khadir, who, interestingly, is the sole connecting link alongside chief selector of India women, Neetu David, uh, with the first ever India women's team that played a World Cup final, and that took place in South Africa 18 years ago in 2005. So for Nushin Al-Khadir, it is going to be a very special tournament. She has an enviable resume as far as coaching career is concerned in the domestic circle. And here is an opportunity for her to actually win the first ever world title for India women. And bearing how India have performed in the bilateral series against New Zealand under 19s at BKC in December, and following that they went early to South Africa, not just to acclimatize themselves, but also play a bilateral series against the hosts, which they won 4-0, with the fifth with one of the five games being abandoned due to wet outfield. These performances are strong indicators that will or are India are going into the World Cup as one of the two favorites, as you rightly mentioned, alongside Australia, who on any given day can win any possible world title there is to be won. But how their team fares is also what I'm looking forward to. A topic, a trend, a theme that has dominated the discourse, Shweta, in the lead up to the
Yes.
World Cup is whether at all players who do meet the age cutoff for the under 19 World Cup and have played for the senior national team already should be at all featuring in the under 19 World Cup squad. And the focal point of this discourse has been Shefali Verma, who's already
Yeah.
played a couple of World Cups, and Richa Ghosh. Both are part of India's senior team, and they've also been picked for the senior T20 World Cup that takes place in February. What are your thoughts on this particularly?
I remember having this conversation, and when the team had come out of the Under 19 World Cup, and Shefali was named the captain, and Richa was also included in the squad, there was a lot of talk around social media that why do you need these two players who have already established themselves in the senior side and have proved themselves at the international level. But to be very honest, if you ask me personally, I think India do not have that luxury of not having these two players. It's an inaugural edition of the World Cup, and you want to win that, because we've seen what 2017, what the performance of the Indian team in 2017 World Cup, 2020 World Cup, what it has done to Indian cricket, domestic cricket back home. So you want that elusive title, and you want your best players who are available to play in those. I would have been still okay if Shweta Sherawat, who has been leading the under 19 team since the start, if she was the captain, because to be honest, it is very hard on Shefali's part. She's joined the team only a month prior to the South Africa series. I am not quite sure how she'll be. Is she going to be aware of the strengths of the certain players? And Shweta, on the other hand, has seen them, grow from strength to strength in the 6 months that they have played together. They possibly the squad, the 17, 18 member squad they had has practically remained the same for all the tournaments. So I think that is something that probably the selectors would have thought about, having Shefali as the captain. Not sure how much she's led and how much she's seen the players. And also, I don't think the 5 matches in South Africa will give her a fair idea and indication, because going by the scorecards, going by how the matches have progressed, it has been a fairly one-sided affair. India was never really challenged in those matches. So that is something that I would have wanted that, continue with Shweta Sherawat as a captain, have the experience of Shefali, have the experience of Richa in the batting order, but just limit them to as players. I mean, this is a personal opinion as a player, but I would really like to know what are your thoughts on this.
I'm quite on the same page as you, Shweta, because I feel that once you have a cabinet full of trophies, only then can you make that
Yeah.
choice of not sending two eligible players who are known performers, who have something very, very special about their cricketing abilities, big hitting abilities, which are quite indispensable in a format like T20s. Uh, Shafali Verma and Richa Ghosh fit the bill. They meet the cutoff eligibility criteria. Send them. I'm totally on board with the selectors as far as this is concerned. But I also do agree with you that as far as the team environment is concerned, I think it's very important how you perform on the field is, after all, a reflection of what the dressing room camaraderie, the dressing room vibe may be like. So yes, there has been the South Africa series, and they've stayed there for a fairly long time leading into the World Cup now. So one can only hope that Shifali and Richa are able to gel, get along with the other players as well as they rightly should, and hope there's not a lot of ego that comes into play, because they are, after all, India players, right? And the other squad members are India under 19s. So there is a very realistic element of egos coming into play. But to Shafali's credit, in the press conference I covered during the Australia versus India series in Mumbai last month, a fellow journalist did ask, whether she would be feeding off other players, and she did mention that one of her first ports of call would be Shweta Sehrawat. And I have a gut feeling that we might even see Shweta lead Indiana team or in a match or two during the World Cup, because we did see that happen when Shefali was arrested. That was a completely different scenario during the South Africa bilaterals. But who knows? She may be handed captaincy duties at some point, depending on how India fare. Yes, they go in as one of the front runners to lift the trophy at the end of this month. But I would not be entirely surprised if Shweta Sehrawat ends up being elevated from vice captain to captain in one or two odd matches. And as far as Richa Ghosh is concerned, we've seen the kind of explosivity she brings to the Indian lineup during the India versus Australia series. And I'm personally looking forward to how she goes about managing her wicket keeping duties. Because, mind you, the squad already has somebody whom I would rate far higher as far as the wicket keeping skills go than Richa Ghosh, and that's Rishita Basu, another fellow Bengal player of hers. And Rishita is a super agile young girl who can really fox you as a wicket keeper. She's got what you would expect of a superb, athletic, agile wicket keeper, and a smart, wily one at that. And with the bat too, she's quite short. She's a short statured athlete, but she can keep the scoreboard ticking. She's got those inventive strokes. She'll lap you, she'll pull you, she'll scoop you, she'll play shots that you cannot find in the cricketing textbook just yet. So Richa Ghosh keeping the gloves does put a question mark on Rishita Basu as well. And if she is given the role to just slot in as a batter, I'm pretty sure Rishita will do a decent job as far as getting those quick runs or closing out an innings is concerned, which again has been a problem with the senior team. But here, looking at how Shafali Verma and Richa Ghosh might dispense their duties, not only will their leadership roles come into play, but how they keep the squad together. That is something I'm especially looking forward to.
I think you mentioned a very good point. How do they keep the squad together? Because I am sure for most people who started playing cricket, obviously when they were 12, 13, 14, Shefali probably would have already made her debut for the national side. So there is a sense of, how are we going to probably cope up with that? So that feeling of intimidation is definitely, that is something that I think the team management and Shefali and Richa will have to work around and make sure that the Indian team gels really, really well.
Certainly. And something that Alisa Healy had said during the pre series presser in Australia at the BCCI headquarters at the Wankhede Stadium is that it gives Shafali Verma, whom Ali Sahili played with at Sydney Sixers
Yeah.
during one of the previous seasons of the WBBL, it gives Shafali the opportunity to grow as an athlete, as a person, because mind you, in the Indian women's senior team setup, she's still very much one of the newbies. She's still a youngster. She has to look up to the Smriti Didis and the Harry Didis and the Jemimas, formerly Mithali Raj, Julian Goswami, all of these players to bounce her ideas off, to get guidance from, and all of a sudden there is a turn of the table, so to speak, and she is the person the other players are going to look up to. So that's an interesting transition Shafali Verma makes. She has a great future ahead of her. We all know that, starting with how she fared at the World Cup in Australia in 2020. She literally led the charge independently, all by herself, getting India to the final hurdle, which is where they fluff their
Yeah.
lines. So hopefully for India, Shafali Verma will be able to make up for that. That deficit that remained in the 2020 edition, and before she joins the squad for the Senior T20 World Cup, India will have a trophy in their cabinet for them to show to the world.
Absolutely. I think I couldn't agree more on this aspect. And, I just personally feel under 19 cricket, it just gives you so much of opportunity to learn from your mistakes. When you're young, you're allowed to make mistakes. Probably that is not the case when it comes to senior level cricket, because there's so much of competition around. You just have probably one, two, and three, two, or maximum three chances, and you have to make that count. So I think under 19 level also gives you a lot of opportunity to fall, commit mistakes, but it also gives you an opportunity to get back and rectify those mistakes. And that is something that I'm sure Shefali and Richa will be looking forward to.
As will the other players of the other teams, because I'm also looking forward to how the South African team performs, because they have some good good bowlers, tall, lanky pacers. Some of Seshni Naidu, for example, was incredible with his spin in the bilateral series. But the other teams whom we haven't seen a lot of, remember Rwanda are making their World Cup debut, which is so
Yeah.
exciting for the women's game, right? So to look forward to something as different as the inclusion of new teams, new members of the ICC family, of the cricketing family, is what will make the tournament special. The other tournament we need to also talk about is something that takes place closer to home. But before I move on to that, if you were to pick one team the as the side you would back to lift the under 19 women's World Cup at the end of this month, who would that be, Shweta?
So I definitely wouldn't be surprised if it's an Australia versus India final. Definitely India have all the strengths, but for me Australia, only because in a world event you cannot keep them out, and they also have almost 7 to 8 players who have played WBBL. We've all seen WBBL and how the impact it has had on Australian cricket, because they played for the state side, they played in the WBBL, they have had an opportunity to actually rub shoulders with international players and learn from them. So that experience and handling pressure, I think that is something that Australia have a little edge, if I may say, over India. And I'm really excited to see Ella Hayward, the off spinner who plays for Melbourne Renegades, Victoria in the domestic WNCL, Amy Smith, the leg spinner who plays for Hobart and she's from Tasmania. So all these players I'm really, really excited for, because they have this skill set, they have the experience of playing in high pressure situation. And I think a world event, that is something that actually counts, and that we've observed that India have played so well in the world event. They've reached the final and faltered in the last stage. So handling pressure is something that I feel Australia is slightly better than India.